Architect Divya Chakravarti. She completed her undergraduate studies from SRM University and she went on to pursue her master's in historic preservation and urbanism and study of the built environment from the University of California, Los Angeles. She went on to work for the Department of Planning and Preservation for the city of Pasadena, California. She also did a brief stint of work for Historic Scotland, Edinburgh, UK. She also worked on conservation projects like Kalsa Mahal, Gokhale Hall in Chennai, and Marimalappa Educational Trust in Mysore. She is currently working as a director of Samrakshan Heritage Consultancy. She is also a co-founder of the Artisan Reprisal of Traditional Materials, Method and Technology. She goes on to conduct workshops to revive traditional and lost methods of construction.
Welcome to the UGC lecture series. This is for Bachelors of Architecture. The subject we are discussing is Evolution of Human Settlements. Lecture number 5, the topic we are looking at is Historical Periods and Growth of Human Settlements. We will be discussing Industrial Age Settlements and Post-Industrial Age Settlements. As Industrial Revolution took place, a relationship developed between the city and the industries or the factories. So, from the rural settlements of being supported by agriculture, it heralded into a factory town and a city. So, this happened basically because of the invention of steam engines. The steam railroads extended its rails from raw products to the factory and to the cities of consumers all over the land. So, as transportation facilities improved, people could commute long distances as well as goods could be transported from one place to another, which enabled people to live away from the city as well as close to the city as possible. Every amenity of urban life was sacrificed to the requirements of industrial production. Railroads and ships joined the factories and the waterfront became the industrial core of the city. So, at this point of time, when agriculture and farming was left behind and industrial life was taking the forefront, people actually sacrificed everything right from basic human requirements and conveniences to live the industrial life or the life in the city, which offered jobs, a more regular job than farming did and more supportive than agriculture, as agriculture was dependent on the natural elements like rain, irrigation and things like that, versus the industry was churning out products. The steam engine ensured that there was constant movement of these products, as well as the railways and the railroads ensured that the products were traveling from one part of the world to another part of the world. So, the impact of the Industrial Revolution was first felt in England, and the new industrial economy, it brought greater exploitation of the poorer with the increase of the new slums. So, as and when industries increased, they needed more and more people to work at these industries, and the best people to do so were the farmers who did not have a regular source of income. So, they were trapped, brought into the cities, and as thousands of people migrated from villages to the towns, it led to a lot of problems like slums, sanitation issues, drainage issues, water issues, etc. So, what could be called mechanical slums, row upon row of crowded workers' houses in the shadow of the factory, were added to the traditional slums. This degraded environment of the factory town hung like a cloud over the urban life for nearly a century and a half after the Industrial Revolution. The impact of the Industrial Revolution is felt till date, for a matter of fact, because it changed the skyline. A lot of these factories were built on the periphery of the towns to enable faster transport of goods, and from the periphery of the towns, the railroads would connect it to the next town, and people cluttered around the factory, and these slums were the worst hit because of no sanitation, no water and overcrowding. Among the deplorable slums of the 19th century factory town in England, the two-story house predominated, stretching in long rows with very small backyards and narrow streets. The living environment was dreary and monotonous. So, when it became so unhygienic, the next thing it led to was diseases. So, crowding on the European continent, however, was even more severe, as indicated in the outline of the tenement block in Vienna. A tenement block is nothing but a series of apartments that we see today, but within one tenement, instead of one family living, there would be 4 to 5 families living, sharing the same quarters and even sharing the facilities like restrooms and bathrooms. Built to a height of about 4 to 5 floors, the block typically contained a double row of dwellings, the interior row facing a narrow interior court on both sides. So when it was built at that height and it was abutting another building, there was a lack of ventilation and light as well. So these were the typical kind of living conditions that you see in these images here. Epidemics were leading so many people crowded in a room, and in a country like England where weather was very cold, they need to have fireplaces and things like that. It was very unhygienic, the streets are overcrowded, and the factories was the main spine of the development. So it completely affected the living conditions, especially of the poor people. At the same time, this was the first time urbanization occurred, where people thronged towards the city for a better kind of living. Till date, that was in history, man has never moved towards the city till the Industrial Revolution began. And since then, man has always moved from villages towards cities in search for a better life and better livelihood. So this completely changed the human settlement pattern. So at the later half of the 18th century, particularly in America now, there was a commerce assumed primacy. In the sense, agriculture was completely removed and only commerce in terms of industries were ruling the cities. The buildings of the bourgeois, that is the middle class, expanded towards with their owners' prosperity. So you had buildings with new typologies that emerged: banks, office buildings, warehouses to store the goods the industries churned out, hotels, because people were traveling on business to accommodate them, hotels were getting constructed, and smaller factories to support the larger ones. So new towns were being founded during this period, which were conceived completely as commercial enterprises. They were not conceived for human settlements, but merely as a continuation of a factory town. And the neutral grid was the most effective means to divide land up into parcels for sale. The city became a checkerboard on which players speculated on shifting land values. So that was the beginning of the real estate market as such, where people wanted prime chunks of the city. So a city was bought over, rural farmland was completely converted into a city, chunks of it was sold to the different stakeholders like factory holders, the upper middle class, or people who were working as the banks, as vice presidents and the directors and such other positions. So till then, when we were talking about the Middle Ages and the medieval settlements where religion played a very important role along with politics, now the market was only the important factor which determined the pattern of urban growth. So it was no longer religion, politics and other cultural imperatives, but solely the market would be allowed to determine the pattern of urban growth. So cities which emerged as a result of this: New York, Philadelphia and Boston, all around the 1920s, exemplified the typical type of a commercial city of this type of era, with their bustling mixed-use waterfront districts. Waterfront is a very important word over here because besides the railroads being developed, it was not sufficient. The ships were still the primary movers and shakers in the industry of transportation. So having developed waterfront cities with a strong roadway and railroad background was the best solution. Millions of rural dwellers no longer needed on farms flocked to the cities, where new factories kept churning out products, and these products were supported by the new markets, which was made accessible by the steamships, railroads, and urban economies was completely woven into the national and international economies as well. Technological innovations poured forth, many with profound impacts. So railroad tracks were obviously important. You can't stress enough about it, because along with transportation, it brought about even travel of people, and with travel of people came travel of knowledge. Literature was moving back and forth. People were learning from other cities, seeing how France developed, how other parts of Europe developed, and with steamships, America and Europe were brought closer, which has never happened before. It was inconceivable for someone from England to travel to America and return within their lifetime. But now with steamships, that was a reality, and along with people, even goods were getting transported. So horse cars in the 1830s, then you had cable cars in the 1870s, and the electric trolleys in the 1880s. So in the 1880s, the first central power plants began providing electrical power to the urban areas. This was another very important crucial event in the timeline of Industrial Revolution, because as power or electricity reached everyone, the kind of life people led, the pattern of living also changed. The rapid communication provided by the telegraph and the telephone allowed formerly concentrated urban activities to disperse across the wider field. So as communication developed, that was the beginning of something called the urban sprawl. The industrial city still focused on the city center, which contained both the central business district, which is basically large office buildings, banks and things like that, and substantial number of factories and warehouse structures. So as the factories were churning out products, the warehouse would store them, and as and when required, they would be either sent by the steamships or the railroads. Both trolleys and railroad systems converged on the center of the city, which boasted the premier entertainment and shopping establishments. And as commerce developed, when people started earning money, the opportunities to spend it was also open. So shopping and entertainment industries opened up, and as people traveled from one place to another, there was a lot of cultural interchange and heritage value interchange as well. The working class lived in crowded districts close to the city, very close to their place of employment. Early American factories were located outside of major cities along rivers. Rivers are very important because they provided water which powered the machinery. After the steam power became widely available, factories could be located within the city in proximity to the port facilities. It was better if it was close to a port because time is money, and when transportation could be directly made to the port, it was an ideal situation. Rail lines and urban labor force. So the large manufacturing zones emerged within this major northeastern and mid-eastern cities such as Pittsburgh, Detroit and Cleveland. So as and when technological innovations were taking place, each city took charge of one industry or one typology of industry, and people flocked towards that city. So at the end, by the late 19th century, factory decentralization had already begun, as manufacturers sought larger parcels of land away from the congestion of the city. So what ideally happened was, yes, they created a problem, all the industries created a problem, people were living in slums, the cities were getting overcrowded, but they needed more place to expand the factory. What better than, starting a new city? So they moved away from the core of the city and they started building new cities on the periphery. Gary, Indiana, for example, was founded in 1906 on the southern shore of Lake Michigan by the United States Steel Company. So this was considered the first supplementary city that was built to support the main manufacturing towns and cities that had emerged. So as there was an increase in crowd, pollution and disease in the central city, there was also a growing desire to escape to a healthy environment. But of course, the poor workers didn't have the luxury to do so. The upper classes had always been able to retreat to homes in the countryside. They would have a summer home, a winter home and things like that. So beginning in the 1830s, commuter railroads enabled the upper middle class as well. The people who worked in banks, who worked in the warehouse districts, people like that could also commute to the city center from away the city. So this was again the beginning of suburbs, the creation of suburbs which were built completely for residential purposes. So horse car lines were built in many cities between this period to enable this movement between the 1830s and the 1880s, which enabled the middle class to move out from central cities to more spacious suburban neighborhoods. finally, during the 1890s, electric trolleys, elevated rapid transit lines proliferated, providing cheap urban transportation for majority of the population. The central business district of the city underwent a radical transformation with the development of the skyscraper between the 1870 and 1900s. These tall buildings were not technically feasible until the invention of the elevator and the steel frame construction methods. So, one of the main things happened was, like, necessity is like the mother of invention. Overcrowding was happening in the city, land was getting very crucial, very expensive. So, what was the best thing to do? Instead of building horizontally, let's start building vertically. It was easier thought than done, because if you built vertically, where was the technology to support that vertical structure? In terms of structural stability, there was nothing. How does one go from the ground floor to the 10th floor or so without any vertical system like the elevator? Another thing is pumping water and sewage coming down. So, all of these were problems that were faced, and as these problems got solutions, the skyscraper became a reality. So, skyscrapers reflect the dynamics of the real estate market. The tall building extracts maximum economic value from a limited parcel of land. These office buildings usually housed growing number of white collar employees, that is the middle classes, in banking, finance, management and business services. They are all a manifestation from the shift of an economy of small firms to one that of large corporations. So, as the skyscraper emerged, even the way of doing business completely changed. From smaller firms, the whole term of corporations began, because they could host more number of employees and more number of people could work under the same roof. So, we will just discuss Manchester, how it emerged as an industrial town completely between 1760 and 1825. Manchester in England is widely known as an illustrative example of the Industrial Revolution. Manchester developed completely only because of the Industrial Revolution. From the positive aspects of economic growth, the technological advances, to the more negative qualities associated like overcrowding, social stratification. So, how does a city become such an industrial powerhouse in such a relatively short period of time? So, from a climate conducive to the cotton trade to the existing canals and transportation mechanisms, Manchester was primed to become an efficient industrial city. In terms of location, it had a waterfront body, it had the correct kind of soil for the cotton trade, and the land was surrounding Manchester where maximum of the industry was there. Manchester was the best location for the cotton mill technology once it caught up and the existing infrastructure could be brought on to Manchester. It had an upper class which quickly prospered and separated themselves from the newly developed and rapidly growing working class. The social stratification was epic as well as the overcrowding. So, the class system became even more prominent, the poor became more prominent and the rich were getting richer. If you look at the working conditions over here, you can see the clear indication of any industry is the quality of air, completely smoke filled. But in again a country like England where the weather is so moist and damp, the smoke becomes smog and which leads to a lot of diseases and epidemics. So, working conditions were terrible, inspiring scholars at that point of time who were trying to critique the working conditions and brought about the class of the working people. This was one of the most felt written things by Frederick Ingles in 1844. The town itself is peculiarly built so that a person may live in it for many years, go in and out daily without coming into contact with the working people's quarter or even with the workers. That is, so long as he confines himself to his business or to pleasure walks. This arises chiefly from the fact that by unconscious tacit agreement as well as with outspoken conscious determination, the working people's quarters are sharply separated from the sections of the city reserved for the middle classes. So this was what the social stratification led to. There was a part of the city a person needn't ever visit unless he lived over there, and that was completely demarcated for the poor people. Then there was an area for the middle class, and then there was an area for the upper class. And a person in the upper class needn't be even aware of what's happening in the other part of the city unless he decided that he had to go to that part of city. His life between the factory, the warehouse and his own house did not even let him encounter the houses of the middle class or the poor workers. If you look at the conclusion of what happened in the industrial age, industrial growth in large centers induced people to remain in cities rather than to migrate to more healthful environments of rural communities, and the inevitable result was the creation of slums. So at the conclusion of the Industrial Revolution, as we were stepping into a new century, the only residual product that we were left behind was a new urban plight, that of slums. Post-industrial age settlements. Now, we saw the end result of an industrial society was that of slums. Post-industrial society, what shift happened we shall see. This is in a stage when society was developing from economic transitions from that provides goods to that is going to provide services. Now in the industrial age, it was completely about production of new goods, new kinds of production lines and things like that. Versus in a post-industrial society, the concentration was more on the service industry. So the service sector was basically nurses, teachers, researchers, social workers, lawyers, etc. And they were basically a result of the industrial age. The industrial age led to a lot of new professions that came about, and the post-industrial society basically supported those positions. The economic transformation associated with the post-industrial society subsequently transforms society as a whole. Information, services, advanced technology, these are more important in post-industrial societies rather than manufacturing tangible goods. So it basically follows an industrial society, as in now it is understood that urbanization has occurred. Now the focus is on how do you support this particular new type of town that has emerged. So this can be seen in places like Europe and United States, which were most strongly affected by the Industrial Revolution, as the other places got the Industrial Revolution at a pretty much later time. United States was the first country to have more than 50% of its workers employed in the service sector jobs. So the places which faced the industrial age and industrial revolution primarily faced the post-industrial age and settlements also primarily. Now, what are the basic characteristics of a post-industrial town? This was popularized by the American sociologist Daniel Bell, and this was around the 1970s this happened. In this book, he describes 6 ways in which a society changes which are associated with post-industrial societies. So there is a shift away from producing goods to creating services. So now we have produced goods like clothing, shoes and things like that. But now people have got money, they want to spend it on things. So you end up having fitness shops, coaching centers, fast food joints and shops that sell the clothing and the shoes like malls. Direct manufacturing of goods became less and the sellers of these products became more. Blue collar, manual labor or jobs, that's what became important. These were replaced by professional jobs and technical jobs like computer analysts and accountants and things like that, as there was a transition in the industry as well. Transition to a focus on theoretical knowledge over the practical know-how. So theoretical knowledge was already there because of inventions and things like that. But now with the emergence of the post-industrial society, when everything in terms of invention was happening and had happened, now there was a freedom for people to think innovative solutions, maybe because of the problems that were caused during the industrial age. So for example, there was knowledge created by doctors which led to new effective models of patient care and medicines and things like that. Increased focus on the implications of new technologies, when and how they should be used, and when and how to control them. Creation of new scientific disciplines like cybernetics, information technology. This was used to assess the impact of new technologies. A critical need for higher educational institutions like universities to create graduates who can develop and control the next wave of technological advances. So, all these were characteristics of a post-industrial city, and all of these happened only because the patterns of the cities could change or develop as well from an industrial age town. Nothing fundamentally had changed in terms of a layout of a city. It was just that the lingering problems from the past became development issues during this current period. So, when you see the problems that we saw that had emerged during the Industrial Revolution, all became the burden on the post-industrial city to solve them. So, what happened was the society was now struggling with issues of resource scarcity, overpopulation, environmental degradation, all of which were basically remnants from that of the Industrial Revolution and Industrial Age. This was actually increased or felt more by corporate liberalism, which meant they were continuing economic growth through the creation of satisfaction of false needs. So, basically they were creating a false environment within society. They were not concentrating on the real issues of an urban place versus let's concentrate on making money, and that was given like false needs. People were expected to have a house, people were expected to live in the suburbs, have a job, drive a car and things like that. But these were just adding to the problems of what a industrial town was facing. Urban development in the context of post-industrial cities was also a point of contention, in the sense there were leaders who were increasingly becoming environmentally aware of what was happening. So, let's not degrade the environment, because it already happened in the Industrial Revolution. We were talking of pollution and things like that, where water bodies were getting polluted, air was getting polluted, as well as cities were getting polluted in terms of overcrowding and lack of sanitation. So, as a result of that, urban sprawl happened where cities were growing exponentially but without any direction, expanding the periphery so it can lower the densities, and physically all office parks, malls, strip malls, condos, corporate campuses and gated communities, they were all singled out as the main issue. Urban sprawl has caused a lot of issues as well. It has made the environment and socially very regressive. Of the former environmental degradation results, encroachment became an issue, because people, even though they moved away from the city, wanted all the benefits of the city and kept coming closer and closer. The wider spread of population meant there was a lot of energy consumed in order, because people had to travel in terms of let it be cars or public transportation, more power was being consumed, which again meant greater pollution. So, as the town was developing and there was a shift completely from an agrarian to a completely industrial town, suburbs were developing, urban sprawl was happening, a kind of agrarian era led on to an industrial one. So, this is likely to continue to serve the function of an urban industrial arrangement, which we had pretty much grown accustomed to. So, various factors they had to concentrate on was capital, labor and land. There were spatial arrangements because of this, and another urban planning which was required in the post-industrial city was sustainable development, because it needed to take care of social, economic, environmental processes, permitting communities to foresee and deal with both present day and future needs, and such that finding a middle ground so that the contemporary needs are not met at the expense of future generations. So, realization happened with respect to let's not degrade our environment, but we need to save it, as well as at the same time they wanted all the creature comforts of what the Industrial Revolution had brought about. So, the end of this, we have looked into industrial age settlements and post-industrial age settlements. We should be able to answer the following questions. What are the salient features of an industrial city, and discuss the settlement patterns emerging from this, explain using an example what was the main outcome in a post-industrial city in terms of town planning, define the term urban sprawl. That brings us to the end of this lecture. Thank you.